As a younger man, Auron was a devoted warrior monk of Bevel who would be groomed for a high-ranking position within the clergy. However, his personal convictions put him at odds with the higher elites of Yevon, and his promotion within the ranks went to his friend Win Kinnock, who would eventually go on to become a maester of Yevon. After these events, Auron would be recruited by the High Summoner Lord Braska to become his guardian during his pilgrimage to fight the great beast known as Sin. Before departing Bevel, Auron and Braska would visit the holding cells, and it was there that they would meet a man named Jecht, who claimed to have been from Zanarkand. Braska offered to have Jecht freed if he agreed to become one of his guardians during his pilgrimage to fight Sin. Jecht agreed, and the three of them set off to visit all the temples across Spira to gain the power to call forth powerful creatures known as Aeons. The three of them would eventually make their way to the ruins of Zanarkand in order to gain the power of the final summoning. However, upon arriving, they were told by Lady Yunalesca that one of them would have to be sacrificed in order to become the faith of the final summoning, and once it was called, Lord Braska would die. Jecht offered to become the faith of the final summoning. Not wishing to see his friends die, Auron begged Lord Braska and Jecht to reconsider, believing that their deaths would be wasted since Sin always returns. Auron eventually gave in to their request to sacrifice themselves to save Spira, but before their deaths, Jecht made Auron promise that he would find a way to bring his son to Spira, and Braska asked him to look after his daughter Yuna. After Sin was defeated and Lord Braska's death, Auron was overwhelmed by grief and confronted Lady Yunalesca, but would eventually be mortally wounded. Now dying, Auron made his way down Mount Gagazet, where he would eventually meet the Ronso warrior Kamari, and would task him to look after Lord Braska's daughter Yuna to take her to the island of Besaid, far away from the capital. Though Auron died, his spirit did not go to the far plains, but instead Auron became a wandering, unsent spirit, and with his new form, and with a little help from Sin itself, Auron was able to travel 1,000 years into the past in order to look after Jecht's son Titus for the next 10 years. When Sin returned to destroy the city of Zanarkand, Auron and Titus were engulfed by Sin and were transported 1,000 years into the future to Auron's original time. After being separated, Auron would meet up with Titus once again at Luca and would then offer to become Yuna's guardian. From that point on, Auron would travel with Yuna and her fellow guardians across Spira and would eventually return to the ruins of Zanarkand to defeat Yunalesca, ending the tradition of the final summoning once and for all. Auron's journey would eventually come to an end when Yuna and her fellow guardians would travel within Sin itself and would defeat the entity Yevon, thereby releasing the souls of the faiths, and as Yuna performed the sending, Auron's soul finally found peace and faded away to be reunited with his friends in the far plains. Squall Leonhart was born in the town of Windhill, and he was the son of Luguna and Rain Lore. However, his mother Rain would die shortly after he was born, and he would be sent off with his stepsister Eleni to live at an orphanage that was owned by Adia Kramer. While at the orphanage, Squall and Eleni would grow very close, with Squall preferring that Eleni was his only friend. However, one day, Eleni left the orphanage under mysterious circumstances, leaving Squall alone. This would cause Squall to become emotionally detached and making it very difficult for him to make any friends. At the age of 6, Squall was sent off to the newly built Balam Garden, and for the next 11 years he would be trained as a member of Seed. At the age of 17, while training with his fellow trainee Cypher, Squall would suffer an injury that left him with a scar across his face, and would retaliate by delivering Cypher a similar injury, leaving him also with a similar scar. After completing an assignment given to him to Dalat City, Squall and a couple of his fellow trainees were officially promoted to Seed. After his promotion, Squall and his fellow Seeds would be contracted to work with Renoa Hartley, the leader of a resistance faction, and over time, Squall and his allies would take part in many important events, including the attempted assassination of Sorceress Adia, take part in the battle between the forces of Balam and Galbada Gardens, and would even travel to the city of Astra to aid the president, who just so happened to be Laguna himself. Eventually, Squall would discover that Sorceress Adia was being controlled by a powerful entity from another time, and after she was defeated, Renoa was chosen to become this entity's new host. However, Squall would rescue Renoa before this could happen. Squall would eventually be reunited with his childhood friend Eleni, who informed Squall and his allies that the entity that was responsible for all of this was named Ultimacia, and the only way to defeat her was to cause a time compression, allowing Squall and his allies to travel to Ultimacia's era to challenge her in person. With the team passing the final trials of Ultimacia's realm, Squall and his allies would challenge Ultimacia, and after a long, hard-fought battle, they would emerge victorious, bringing the universe back into balance. However, as time began to flow back to normal, Squall was able to send a message to a young Adia Kramer, giving her the concept of garden and seeds, and with this final act, and some help from Noah, Squall and the gang were eventually returned back to their own time period where they celebrated their victory together. Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here at 3TR, and I'm here to present my 5th Versus Series matchup for 2015, and I must say that this match in particular has actually been a dream match of mine, pitting two of my all-time favorite Final Fantasy characters of all time against each other. So sit back and relax as I pit the legendary guardian himself, Auron, against the Haunted Seed Squall Leonhart, and I shall start by comparing them physically. Auron is classified as being a 36-year-old human male standing 6 feet tall, and during the time of Yuna's pilgrimage, and despite his older-looking appearance, he was still well into his prime. Due to his physical build, Auron was mainly a power user, giving him much more muscle mass in his upper body regions ahead of his lower regions, and by the time of Yuna's pilgrimage, Auron's durability would have been extremely high, shown as when Auron was a much younger man, and after being mortally wounded by Yunalesca, he was still able to crawl and make his way down Mount Gagaset, then to the Comlands, and would eventually make his way to the outskirts of the capital of Bevelle before he died. And though Auron, being an unsent spirit, may have granted him some physical enhancements, that does not stop the fact that Auron was literally a human tank. I'm willing to go so far as to say that Auron's physical strength and durability are so high that he could go toe-to-toe with a first-class member of Shinra's soldier class, and as many people know, those guys are tough as hell and are pretty hard to take down. Auron's only real physical defect is that because he has such a high focus on his strength, this has caused him to have a lack of any real speed, which does make him less maneuverable in combat and does put him at a somewhat disadvantage against opponents who focus on their speed. But this is the only real small weakness that Auron has, and Auron's level of combative skills can easily make up for this. Now, to be honest, there really is not much to say about Squall in a physical sense. Squall is classified as a 17-year-old human male standing 5'9" and is in relatively good shape. Like Auron, during his training to become a member of Seed, Squall put a very heavy focus on his physical build to rely on his strength rather than his speed. However, after being injured by his rival Cypher, Squall would decide to readjust his physical focus to balance himself between his strength and his speed to allow himself to apply extra power blows within the use of his Gunblade. In terms of his durability, I would say that due to the fact that he is still so very young, Squall is nowhere near his physical prime, and though Squall certainly is tough as a combatant, he's really not the type who would last long in a battle of attrition. In the end, Squall's physicality makes him a very formidable combatant with a lot of raw potential, but he clearly does not stand in the class of top heavy hitters like a Cloud or Sephiroth. Okay people, this one's pretty obvious to call. Auron clearly has the physical advantage over Squall in nearly every single department. He is more than twice Squall's age, he's taller and far more durable, able to take far more punishment, and he is clearly stronger with a higher level of combative stamina. The only real slight advantage Squall has over Auron is that because his physical build is much more balanced between his speed and strength, this would give Squall a slight speed advantage and make him a far more agile opponent than Auron. However, in the long run, this would be very little against the greatest Guardian that Spira has ever seen, and it is for these reasons that I give Auron the decisive edge in physical capabilities. Now, thanks to some feedback from some of you on my last versus series matchup, I will be comparing the ultimate weapons of both these combatants at their maximum levels. And with that out of the way, Auron's ultimate weapon was dubbed the Masamune, and it is one of the 7 legendary celestial weapons, and once it has absorbed the power of the Mars Crest and the Mars Sigil, its inner power is unlocked. Unlike other versions of the Masamune sword, Auron's version resembled more of a Western sword rather than a Japanese blade. The Masamune, when fully powered, granted a user a number of unique and powerful magical abilities, making it an extremely dangerous weapon to fight against. It gave the user a break damage limit ability, allowing Auron to cause more damage than any other weapon he would wield could allow him. The Masamune is the only celestial weapon that can actually exceed the 100% worth of damage. It was also granted a triple overdrive ability, allowing Auron to charge up his overdrive attack gauge 3 times faster, giving Auron access to his most powerful attacks faster than normal. The first strike and counterattack abilities confiscated for Auron's lack of physical speed, allowing Auron to not only be able to make the first strike, but automatically counterattack an opponent should he get hit. Like all celestial weapons, Masamune allowed a user to ignore a target's defenses, but one of the more unique abilities that was exclusive only to the Masamune was that this weapon can deal more damage the lower Auron's health is, making Auron even more powerful and dangerous over the course of a battle. Squall's ultimate weapon was dubbed the Lionheart Gunblade. The Lionheart Gunblade had a blade that had the look of a translucent dark blue edge with some white near the middle of the blade. The frame of the gun portion was modeled with features to incorporate the revolver, which just so happens to be Squall's starting weapon, and this included a black grip handle base, a breech and barrel and magazine portion similar to an M16 assault rifle that had various grips. Like all Gunblade models, it included a trigger mechanism which allowed Squall to fire a shockwave through the blade itself as he attacked, allowing the weapon to do double the amount of damage onto an opponent without Squall having to apply too much of his own strength within his blows. One element of the Lionheart Gunblade that puts it far above any other model was due to the fact that its high-value design granted Squall access to a couple of extremely fast and powerful special attacks that only the Lionheart Gunblade could perform. However, I will go much more into detail on those attacks later. In conclusion, the Lionheart Gunblade really is the perfect weapon for a combatant like Squall. It not only works within the combative style that Squall has chosen, but it also enhances his own combative effectiveness and grants him a number of abilities to apply some of the most powerful special attacks amongst all the main lineup of main character protagonists, making Squall, when equipped with this weapon, a force not to be underestimated. Comparing Squall's Lionheart Gunblade to Auron's Masamune sword makes this category undoubtedly the closest to call, but there is a decisive winner. The Lionheart Gunblade is without question the best weapon that Squall can wield. It takes advantage of all of Squall's combative capabilities and allows him to double his performance in terms of strength, speed, and power, making Squall as a combatant more dangerous than he would ever be if he was wielding any other Gunblade at this point in his life. The problem is that Squall as a fighter is nowhere near his full potential, and therefore the Lionheart Gunblade, when equipped, is working within a combative level that Squall could one day achieve later in his life with any other weapon. And the fact that this weapon is man-made and its recipe can be found in a magazine doesn't make it very unique and original, as the Gunblade was one of the main weapons used for Seed trainees, and I'm sure Squall was not the first nor only person who could be walking around carrying one of these. On the other hand, Auron was not only well into his physical prime, but his Masamune sword is not only one of a kind, but its abilities are magic-based and not only compensate for Auron's physical weakness, but can actually turn his weaknesses into an asset, making Auron far more powerful and allowing Auron to break his own combative limits, making Auron's Masamune sword one of the most powerful magical swords not only just within Final Fantasy X, but within all Final Fantasy lore. And it is for these reasons that I'm giving the decisive weapon edge to Auron's Masamune sword. Auron Auron was not much of a magic user and chose to rely on enhancing his capabilities with the use of his sword, and within his series of special attacks he could apply with his weapon, he had a lot of unique attacks that could affect the combative status of his opponents. A few of the much more effective attacks that Auron had in his arsenal were Power Break, that could reduce the attack strength of an opponent, Armor Break, which could lower an opponent's defenses, and Magic Break, which could obviously lower one's strength's use of magic. Like all members in his party, Auron also had access to 4 powerful finishing moves known as overdrives, which could be accessible once his battle gauge had reached its maximum, which all ranged from the shooting Star Strike, which could hit an opponent so hard he could send them flying like a home run, to his tornado attack, which could suck in all enemies in the vicinity, in which Auron could then set it on fire, causing even more damage. In a whole, in terms of special combative abilities, Auron is a juggernaut in battle and brings a large amount of destructive power within his powerful array of overdrive attacks. However, his combative discipline has granted him the ability to decisively affect the combative status of most of his opponents, making Auron one of the most dangerous members in his party. What makes Squall such a difficult combatant to analyze in terms of his magical abilities is the fact that there are not really many sources that clarify exactly what magical abilities he uses in combat. The very nature of how magic is even used in Final Fantasy VIII is very unreliable due to the fact that the magic system is very heavily limited to the use of the draw system, which requires a character to draw a quantity of magic spells from an opponent instead of actually learning it themselves, meaning that a character is limited to the amount of times a character can use a specific spell only by the amount of times they have drawn a specific spell from an enemy opponent. The only concrete spell that can be officially tied to Squall in terms of offensive basic magics are his use of fire spells, which he has been seen using in Kingdom Hearts, which he only seems to rely on to use for a long range attack should the opponent refuse to get close. Another element of Squall's magical abilities, which too is very unreliable, is the use of his Guardian Forces. The Guardian Forces are the summonings of Final Fantasy VIII, but what makes them so important is that they allow a user, when equipped with a specific Guardian Force, the ability to channel a magical spell that they have drawn within themselves and transfer that power into one of their physical statuses. But again, there is no source that states exactly what Guardian Forces Squall has officially equipped it. There are only 2 that we know for a fact that Squall has been in contact with, and even if he had these equipped, he only would have the use of fire spells to be able to increase his physical status, and they would be able to affect the battle in a very minimum way. And on top of that, even if he uses a Guardian Force in the middle of a fight like this, it would be a literal death sentence since it requires the user to be completely defenseless while they concentrate on summoning the Guardian Force to the field to aid them. The only reliable special attack that Squall has in his corner are the use of his Limit Break attacks. However, they too possess a combative flaw. While Squall is equipped with the Lionheart Gunblade, he has access to 4 special attacks. However, without the use of a powerful spell known as Aura, Squall has only access to these 4 special attacks when he is low on health and right at the point when he's about to lose. And on top of that, even after Squall has initiated the opening attack Fury Strike to begin his Limit Breaker sequence, the following up attack is completely random. In a whole, Squall may not be the most powerfully focused magic user in his party. His variety of special finishing moves is packing a lot of raw, destructive, uncontrollable power. This is another round that has a clear winner, but once again I will go into each department with detail. Auron may not use any real standard forms of magic at all, but having spent a good amount of time around High Summoner Braska as a younger man, and then the Black Mage Lulu in his prime, who both would easily eclipse Squall in terms of magics, this would allow Auron to easily contend with Squall's basic fire spells. Squall's use of the Guardian Forces could be more useful to him in battle. However, in a high energy fight like this, it's very doubtful that Squall would be able to build enough distance between himself and Auron to concentrate on summoning his Guardian Forces to the field, and would require Squall to be completely defenseless, and once Auron realizes exactly what Squall is doing, he would just go on a total offense and finish Squall off before he had a chance to summon a Guardian Force to aid him. And finally, Squall's Limit Breaker attacks require him to be at the point in a fight where he is right about to lose, and even if he was able to use any single one of them, Auron's special attack power brick alone would be able to weaken Squall's combative strength greatly, making the effectiveness of Squall's limit breaker attacks so much lower than they would be at full strength that Auron, being the human tank that he is, would be able to easily withstand Squall's limit breaker attacks, leaving Squall open to Auron's counterattack or one of his own overdrive attacks. In conclusion, Squall does have a solid amount of magical techniques and special abilities at his disposal, but Auron is much more prepared to either deal with Squall's limited fire spells, take Squall out before he uses his Guardian Forces, or affect Squall's combative status to withstand Squall's limit breaker attacks, and it is for these reasons I'm giving Auron the edge in magical and special abilities. Just as I've done in all my previous matchups involving sword users, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to help better illustrate the battle and tactical approaches of both combatants. And with that out of the way, by the time of High Summoner Yuna's pilgrimage to defeat Sin, Auron most likely would have spent at least 20 years training and honing his skills as a swordsman, with this training to become a warrior monk for Bevelle beginning before the age of 16, then going on to become a guardian for High Summoner Braska at age 26, then after dying and becoming an unsent spirit, would spend another 10 years keeping an eye on Jack's son Titus, and keeping his combat skills intact waiting for Sin's eventual attack. Like Squall, Auron too was a very power-focused offensive sword fighter, and over the course of his life, it is my belief that after joining High Summoner Braska on his pilgrimage, Auron's original group would have been balanced, with Jack being the speed fencer, Braska handling the team's magic, and Auron being the heavy muscle of the group. Auron also would have had extensive experience combating groups of fiends over the course of his life. However, I also believe that his encounter with Lady Unaleska, which led to his death, would have encouraged Auron to build a much stronger defensive stance, proving that a total offensive tactic can easily lead to defeat. And this theory of mine is also supported by the fact that two of Auron's exclusive special techniques are the abilities Guard and Sentinel, which can greatly enhance his defenses and protect his allies. Because of these traits, it is my belief that Auron would have been a practitioner in Forms 1 Seicho, which is efficient against multiple opponents, Form 3 Surisu, which focused on total defense and energy preservation, and Form 5 Gemso, which focused on attack and immediately counterattacking. By balancing his own approach in combat, it suits the needs of the moment and allows Auron to use his exceptional skills with the blade to be prepared for just about any combat scenario. Whether he was fighting alone or alongside allies, he was more than comfortable with either being the spirit type of an engagement or taking a supporting role in drawing attention to himself, allowing his allies to regroup themselves to re-engage. What you get with Auron is literally the perfect guardian, someone who has the skill set, experience, and knowledge to know when to go on the defensive, offensive, and use his exceptional skills to exploit a weakness in his opponents and take the initiative. The only real weakness that Auron would ever seem to have is if he encountered an opponent whose skill level was so high that they could apply an extremely flexible and creative series of powers and speed strikes for an excessive long period of time, to the point where Auron's energy-preserving Surisu style would eventually run out of stamina. But there is only one man in all of Final Fantasy who could pull off that, and like Auron, he too is a legend in his own world. During his training to become a member of Seed, Squall was mainly a power offensive sword fighter, who relied on using his strength and unique properties of his gunblade to further enhance the amount of force put into his strikes to break through his opponent's defenses, though he was never afraid to use defensive blocks in order to immediately counterattack. And within his adventures in Final Fantasy and the Kingdom Hearts franchise, it would have been required of Squall to be able to engage and fight off groups of opponents at once, whether he was fighting alongside allies or was by himself. From these examples, Squall would have been a practitioner in Forms 1 Seicho and Form 5, but instead of using the Shien variation, which was mainly used for projectile defense, Squall's style of Form 5 would have resembled more of Gemso, which focused more on blade-on-blade combat. The primary combative traits of Seicho and Jimso was that Seicho had many wide swinging strikes designed to strike out against numerous opponents at once, and its unpredictable wide-scale maneuvers can be used to disarm an opponent, while Jimso focused on strength and counterattacking and did provide a user with a powerful offensive approach and some defensive maneuvers. However, the weaknesses of Squall's form was that both Seicho and Jimso are not the best forms used against a single well-trained opponent, and that Seicho's wide sweeping moves lacked any kind of precision, which can lead to making some defensive gaps, and Jimso's lack of mobility did make it terrible against speed fencers. To which we do have examples, as during one of Squall's sparring matches against Cypher, Cypher was able to use his speed and piercing precision strikes to force Squall back, then deflect Squall's power strikes to leave an opening that Cypher exploited and used a basic magic spell in order to knock Squall down that could have led to Squall's defeat. And another example that's in the Kingdom Hearts franchise is that Squall's lack of mobility worked against him against someone like Sora, who was capable of moving in close and delivering a series of fast strikes, then falling back avoiding Squall's counterattacks. However, it is fair to state that by the end of Final Fantasy VIII, Squall's experience in battle would have allowed him to smoothen out these weaknesses in his combat style to a degree. In a whole, Squall was a pretty straightforward combatant, and though he was not very creative in combat or posed a wide scale of effective combative tactics, he had learned through experience how to make what he did have at his disposal count, and even when the chips were down, he could still prove to be a quite serious threat against even the very best. Oh boy. Okay, look folks, there is no question that on his own, Squall is a very skilled and powerful swordsman, with the potential of being able to go head to head with the very best that this franchise has to offer. The problem is that he would be facing an opponent who simply outclasses him in every tactical department at this point in his life. Auron, as a much younger man, relied on the very straightforward offensive tactical approach that Squall would be using against him, and therefore Auron would know exactly how to respond. And on top of that, the fact that Auron has the abilities and techniques that can seriously affect not only Squall's performance, but his combative effectiveness, and then put up a solid, nearly unbreakable defense which would make even Squall's most powerful offensive techniques very non-effective, and then Auron would simply counterattack and finish Squall off. What we have here is a working in progress skilled swordsman in Squall against a seasoned and highly experienced master swordsman with years under his belt in Auron, and it is for these reasons that I give Auron the decisive edge as a battle tactician. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to come out and say right now that when I originally planned out this matchup months ago, I did it with the best of intentions. I really felt that a match between Squall and Auron would actually be pretty fair. However, this is the kind of fight that sounds really good on paper, but once you take the player's influence out of the equation and focus on what these characters can do on their own, it's clear to see why this matchup was so one-sided. I envision a fight between these two as they would be through my experience with them, in which from my playthroughs of both Final Fantasy VIII and X, my Squall has not only been maxed out in terms of his levels, but I've equipped him with the most powerful magical spells allowing him to cause the absolute maximum amount of damage as possible, and with the magic spell Aura, I could simply bust out Squall's limit breaker attacks turn after turn after turn, making him a completely overpowering force of nature. And I've done the same thing with Auron, completing the entire sphere grid and giving Auron magical spells and abilities that he shouldn't be able to perform on his own. So to make this match fair as possible, I was forced to seriously power down both characters. When one does that, a winner is clearly decided. Auron is more than twice Squall's age and is still well in his physical prime despite being dead, while Squall is still very much working towards his prime. Squall's Lionheart Gunblade's only real benefit is that it gives him a much higher strength level and access to a few more finishing special attacks, while Auron's Masamune sword is granted magical properties that can actually confiscate for Auron's lack of speed and grant him the ability to not only attack first, but immediately counterattack an opponent, while also allowing Auron to not only fill up his overdrive gauge 3 times faster than normal, but exceed the amount of damage that he could dish out if he was wielding any other weapon. Squall's basic fire spells would pretty much be downright useless, and attempting to summon a Guardian Force in a high energy fight like this against Auron would simply be suicide, as it would force Squall to have to be completely defenseless while trying to concentrate on building up the power to bring a summoning to aid him, and at that point Auron would just go on a total offense and finish Squall off before he got a chance to complete the summoning. And even Squall's various powerful limit breaker attacks can be greatly affected by Auron's techniques of being able to affect Squall's physical status, to the point that even when Squall does use one of these moves, its effectiveness against Auron would be minimum. And in terms of their tactical approaches, Auron knows from experience that an all-out offensive approach like Squall's would only work for a short-term engagement, and Auron's defensive capabilities are so well developed that Auron would have no trouble holding off Squall's offense. Then once he's taken the blunt of it, Auron would simply counterattack, wear Squall down, and retaliate with his own powerful offensive techniques. A fight between Auron and Squall would play out most likely like the fight between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader from The Empire Strikes Back, with the initial phase of the fight playing out like the duel between Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi from Revenge of the Sith. As the fight begins, Squall would immediately charge forward and take the offense, while Auron goes to a defensive stance, and for the first few minutes, Auron gives ground in order to get a better feel for Squall's skill level, while Squall would continue his power offense, believing that he will eventually break through Auron's defense. But eventually, Auron would deflect one of Squall's power strikes and retaliate with one of his own, knocking Squall back a number of feet, and as he recovers to his feet, he would immediately be struck by Auron's power break strike, knocking Squall back again. As Squall recovers once more, he begins to feel kinda strange somehow, and notices that Auron is simply standing yards away, taking a defensive stance once more. Squall decides to shoot off a few fire spells at Auron, but Auron easily deflects them. Squall would then charge once again at Auron to re-engage with his Gunblade, but this time Squall is unable to force Auron back, like before, and he simply is able to stonewall Squall's offense once again, and again Auron would deflect one of Squall's strikes, and this time he would use his armor break strike to knock Squall back once again. As Squall recovers this time, he is suddenly attacked by now charging Auron, and due to the fact that Auron has greatly weakened Squall's defenses with his armor break strike, and now Squall is having an extremely hard time blocking Auron's powerful series of strikes, which may not be hitting Squall directly, but the force of Auron's strikes are so overwhelming that Squall is being worn down, and with one dedicated strike from Auron, Squall would be sent flying a good number of feet away, taking great damage. Squall gets up one last time, and now greatly weakened is able to initiate a Rinzuken strike, but at the last moment, Auron is able to enter a defensive stance once more, allowing him to withstand the initial fury of power strikes. Now, at this time, 4 things can possibly happen, but they would all have the same outcome. Due to the unpredictable functions of the Lionheart Gunblade, if Squall follows up by using either the Rogue Divide, the Fated Circle, or the Lionheart Strike, Auron would simply be able to withstand any one of these attacks and would simply counterattack with one of his own overdrive attacks, ending the fight. And the worst case scenario is if Squall attempts to use the Blast Zone attack, Auron would simply use one of his overdrive attacks once again to finish off Squall before he got a chance to use his attack. And thus, I declare Auron, the legendary Guardian, the winner. And that's a wrap. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this Versus Series matchup, and please remember that this outcome was my own personal opinion, so please feel free to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, especially if you think that Squall can actually win this fight. I actually withheld at uploading this video for about 2 weeks just thinking of how Squall could possibly beat Auron without the use of his guardian forces and magics, and I couldn't think of anything. And the only conclusion I could come up with is if Squall was fighting the much younger Auron, then he would certainly win then, but not against this version of Auron. And if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe to keep track of me and my future Versus Series matchups and other videos, and like always, here's a preview of my next Versus Series matchup.